Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, we are going to tackle part one of our World's Best SOC series, and that will be deploying our backend storage. And our backend storage will be responsible for storing all of our security events. And of course, this may arguably be the most important piece of the stack, because without storage and the ability to actually store your logs, then you can't really view or react to anything. And I like to deploy the backend storage before I deploy my Wazuh Manager, Graylog, and any of the other open source tools that we will cover in future videos. We first need to have this key piece, and that being our backend storage. For this video, we will be deploying the Wazuh-Indexer, which, if you're familiar with Elastic, then you would know a few years back, Elastic changed their licensing due to some beef with AWS. So in result of that, AWS forked the version of Elastic prior to the license change, which was 7.10.2, I believe, and created OpenSearch. The Wazuh team then came around and has forked, I think, to my own understanding at least, I could be wrong, but they forked OpenSearch like 1.3 maybe, I think, don't quote me on that, but they forked OpenSearch and created their own Wazuh-Indexer is what they're calling it, which if you're familiar with Elastic or even more if you're familiar with OpenSearch, this will be very familiar to you. So it's had quite the journey over the last few years ever since the license change. I will do my best to refer to it as the Wazuh-Indexer. That's still kind of a new term to me, to be honest. I'm so used to still calling it either Elastic or OpenSearch. So I will do my best to not interchangeably use those. So I'll try to stick to Wazuh-Indexer because that's what we will be using from here on out. But don't fear if you are already familiar with Elastic or OpenSearch. Wazuh hasn't really reinvented the wheel with this or created their whole new service. It is still very similar to what comes with the OpenSearch deployment as well. So if you are already familiar, you shouldn't have any problems. So what are some key pieces that we need for our backend storage? Well, we of course first need to be able to receive logs for periods of times, right? And we need to be able to search within particular timeframes. And that is exactly what the Wazuh-Indexer will allow us to do. It won't only store and index all of our data, but it will allow us to make search requests against data to return within the given timeframes. It also has the ability to scale out, so we can cluster multiple nodes together for increased performance, higher availability. And especially as you get to bigger production environments, I highly recommend deploying a cluster of Wazuh-Indexers so that you have that not only increased performance, but because they're all able to share the load of the logs that they are receiving, but also gives you that higher availability. So we can afford for one node to go down, and we still have the ability to store our logs and view our logs. So what we're going to focus on this video, again, we will be deploying the back-end storage of our SIEM stack, and that's going to be our Wazuh-Indexer. And kind of a little bit of stripping out aside of kind of the high level architecture overview that we went over in the previous video, the flow of what will actually be writing to our backend storage is going to be Graylog. So our endpoints are first going to send their logs via the Wazuh agent to our Wazuh Manager. Our Wazuh Manager is then going to send them to Graylog. Graylog is going to do our log normalization and some of our enrichment. And then Graylog is actually going to write the logs to our Wazuh-Indexer. And that'll be how our data ultimately flows and gets to the Wazuh-Indexer. Fear not, we haven't deployed Wazuh or Graylog yet. Those will be for future videos, but we first need, before we can deploy these guys, especially Graylog actually won't start up if you don't have a running backend storage. Even if we want to deploy Graylog, it would break until we had our Wazuh-Indexer up and running. I mentioned a clustering of nodes that you can do. For this demo, I'm only going to be doing a one node cluster because I am running this demo environment in the cloud, and it is money out of my pocket to pay for these resources for this demo. So since I'm not going into any kind of production environment or doing this at a massive scale, I'm just going to stick with a one node cluster. But you can also bump up to as many nodes within your cluster as you want. Like I've deployed as many as 12 node clusters before in the past. So Wazuh-Indexer makes it super easy to add nodes dynamically to the cluster as we need to scale out. I'm sure there is a limit as to like what's the best practice for the max number of nodes you would want to add to a cluster. But even doing my bigger like 12 node cluster, I never had any issues. So I'm sure there is a limit, but do know like it would take a while to get there. And what's nice too is that we can dynamically add to our cluster without any downtime, right? So let's say, for example, I have a 3-node cluster running and I'm noticing some performance degradation. Maybe the Wazuh-Indexer is taking a while to return us our search results. Maybe Graylog is saying that there's delays writing to the Wazuh-Indexer because the Wazuh-Indexer is telling it to slow down. So if that's the case, I then just spin up a new server, add it to the cluster, and then that's it. The cluster will handle balancing everything back out in terms of the shards and the data that are written on each of the disks with on the nodes within the cluster. So a lot of, and that's what's great. That's what ultimately made Elastic so popular in the first place, is just how robust it was, the ability to cluster nodes together to give you this high availability. It was very fast. The API is very rich and allows you to do a ton of stuff, and it benefits our SIEM stack very well. So I've also written a Medium post that I will link to in the description below that will also contain commands that we're going to run throughout this video. So if you want to follow along, you'll be able to copy and paste the commands from there. So I'll scroll down a little bit and let's get to some of the kind of more advanced topics. So when we are deploying our cluster, we have the ability to assign each individual node different roles. And predominantly the top three are your master node, your data node, and your ingest node. Our master node is in charge of cluster-wide settings and changes. It allows new nodes to join the cluster. It will allocate the shards appropriately to each of the nodes within the cluster so that they are balanced out. The master node is a critical piece in the infrastructure. If there is no master node that can be detected, then the Wazuh-Indexer won't be able to function correctly. So the master node is a role that is required for at least one of your nodes within your environment. And I would also recommend, if you're doing a 3-node cluster, for example, giving each of those also a master node role. You can allocate as many nodes within the cluster to have the ability to have the master role, but only one node within the cluster will have the master role at runtime, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm kind of explaining that. Okay, so let's say, for example, I have my 3-node cluster. Node 1 is my master, and node 1 were to go offline for some reason. Node 2 or 3, because they also have the ability to become a master, one of those two nodes would pick up the master role. So servers 2 and 3 would see, oh, node 1 is offline, I can't connect to it, and that was our master. We need to now elect a new master. So it will choose either node 2 or node 3 to become the new master, and everything will operate accordingly. Where, let's say, for example, if I deployed this in an insufficient manner, I still had a 3-node cluster, but only node 1 had the master role assigned to it. Let's say node 1 is the master. Okay, things are running smoothly. Node 1 then goes down. Now nodes 2 and 3, while they're still operational, there is no master node assigned to the cluster, right? So they actually aren't going to be able to function properly without having a master node. So it's always a good idea, especially like in a 3-node cluster, to allocate all 3 nodes to be able to be a master role. As you start to scale out and add more and more nodes, like if you add a 4th node, you don't need to also make sure that one also has the ability to be a master role, that's where you can start to diversify and say, okay, this one's only going to be a data node, where this one is going to be a ingest node. So depending on how big you want to build your cluster out, you can pick and choose what role individual nodes have within the cluster to fine tune for better performance. And depending on, what your search query, how intense your searches are, every search that you make, let's say within Grafana or Kibana, that's going to put load on the Wazuh-Indexer because it's having to retrieve that data and return it back to you. So depending on how complex those are, you can fine tune node roles to best fit your environment. Our Wazuh-Indexer also gives us our higher availability. So within our 3-node cluster, we can afford for one of our nodes to go down and we still get our smooth operation. So we could lose node 1 and nodes 2 and 3 are able to rebalance out, and we're able to still write and read data from the cluster without any issues. And then when node 1 comes back online, it just rejoins the cluster and then everything balances out again. And then it's all being handled for us. Again, that's one of the other big benefits of the Wazuh-Indexer, is that it's able to kind of do some of the self-healing and rebalancing without us having to actually go in and manually do anything, which is really nice. So then how is the data actually organized on the Wazuh-Indexer? And by no means is this a true deep dive into the Wazuh-Indexer. There are a lot of other blogs out there that I'll link to, actually a good one that I found in the description below, in allocating the size of your indexes and the number of shards that you assign per index. But I did want to kind of just quickly highlight how data was actually organized within the Wazuh-Indexer. The two main pieces that I want to discuss will be our indexes and shards. And indexes are kind of like our unique names that will write data to, that will allow us to refer to that data when we hook Grafana up to it, when we hook Kibana up to it, when we make our own API requests. Right, that initially kind of tells Elasticsearch, hey, this is the index where the data that I want to retrieve is actually stored. And that could be any name, right? I could name that index, Office 365 logs, or Wazuh alerts logs, or Windows Sysmon logs. It is a good practice to rotate those indexes per day. So every day we will create a new index that will hold the data for that day, right? And it's kind of an important step, because you don't just want to have one index that holds, 3 months of data, because then you're having to tell the Wazuh-Indexer, okay, the data is here, but now that's such a wide window that the Wazuh-Indexer is going to take that much longer to retrieve it and present it back to you, because it's having to search through 3 months time to find what exactly you're looking for. Where if you roll over every day, you would tell our Wazuh-Indexer, hey, the data that I want to retrieve is on, let's say, October 2nd. We'll take today's date. So the Wazuh-Indexer will immediately jump to October 2nd and then retrieve whatever search results that you are looking for. So it will significantly shrink down just the scope of logs that we are telling the Wazuh-Indexer to roll through. And that makes it a lot faster. This will become much more clear in the next video when we handle installing Graylog and configuring. And Graylog will allow us to configure our indexes and what data we write to our indexes. So if what I'm discussing now you feel like is just kind of going over your head and you're much more of a visual learner, just like myself, we will actually get our hands on with this in the next video. Our indexes are composed of one or more shards, and that'll be a setting that we will also be able to set within Graylog as well. Depending on the size of your index, it can be a bad practice if you only have one shard. Let's say I have one index that's a week's worth of data, and I only have one shard that's also 1 week's of data. The Wazuh-Indexer can't quickly jump to the right spot of where that data may be in a quick manner, right? It's having to crunch through much longer to finally get there. So there is benefit too by composing your indexes to be made up of multiple shards as well. there kind of is a fine line. You don't want to be too small, but you also don't want to be too big, because that can also give you negative performance as well. And when it comes to the shards, the Wazuh-Indexer will be really good about handling that kind of behind the scenes for us. So really, once we set our initial index and tell that index and tell the Wazuh-Indexer that, hey, this index is going to be composed of, let's say, 2 shards, we pretty much won't have to worry about it again. However, one thing to note is we will have a shard called a replica. And the replica shard is exactly as it sounds like. It is a replica of that index's data. So the Wazuh-Indexer is going to balance data across our nodes within the cluster, right? So some data for a search may be on node 1, some data may be on node 2, and some other data may be on node 3. And let's say, for example, I don't have a replica. So if node 1 were to go down and the data I want to search and query on is actually stored on node 1, I won't have access to that data until node 1 is back online. Where if I did have a replica, then a replica of that same data would be stored on either node 2 or node 3. So if node 1 were to go down, then I can still access that data because there's an exact copy of it on either node 2 or node 3. However, the caveat to this though is it does, double your disk space that you are consuming, because there is an exact copy of that index's data. So if one day of data was, let's say, 100 gigs, and we do have a replica configured, that will be a total of 200 gigs that the Wazuh-Indexer will take up on disk space to actually write those logs. So do keep that in mind. So perhaps maybe the biggest challenge to deploying a cluster is adequately sizing the amount of disk space that you will need. I personally don't think it's possible to get perfect the first time. I always kind of recommend I'd rather over provision at the start than under provision. Depending on the number of endpoints who you're collecting logs from, the number of maybe firewall or other network devices that you're collecting logs from, it's really hard to accurately predict, okay, and depending also on your data retention requirements, it's really hard to predict, okay, if I want to store 3 months of hot data, right, I need 2 terabytes of disk space. It's hard to get that right the first time, and even the second and even the third time. Wazuh does provide a table that they say, a table that you could use for reference to maybe get around the ballpark of how much disk space do I actually need to allocate this cluster. But do bear in mind, you probably won't get this right the first time. Drives are getting a lot cheaper, so I would always recommend over provisioning rather than under provisioning. You do always have the ability to allocate more space to your drives, but I would make sure you do have the proper alerting configured when it comes to kind of your first deployment of your Wazuh-Indexer stack, because you don't know how much disk you're going to be consuming until you actually start getting data within there. And then you'll be able to much more accurately predict estimate on how much disk space do I need to actually allocate for whatever my retention periods may be. I would say also always use SSDs within any production environment. We will be doing a 1-node cluster, and then scrolling down to the ports will need to be open. So if you are deploying your backend storage, which I always like to recommend within a segmented VLAN, then maybe your Graylog, your Wazuh, your Grafana, right? I always do kind of recommend any, quote unquote backend storage, such as a Wazuh-Indexer, a MySQL, a Cassandra, having those segmented off in a VLAN that is a hard deny, right? And then we explicitly whitelist the connections that we need to be made. So let's actually get into the deployment of our Wazuh-Indexer server. So on the left here, I have my CLI to my server, and I am actually deploying this on a Debian 11 box. Other Linux distros are also supported: Ubuntu, CentOS 7 through 8, Red Hat 7 through 9, Amazon Linux 2. So there are a handful of other distros that you can deploy this onto. but I am deploying it on a Debian 11 box, and we'll be working on Debian 11 boxes throughout the remainder of this series as well. So let's first create certificates that we will use to encrypt the communication between our clients and the Wazuh-Indexer. So this will encrypt our logs in transit as they traverse the network to our Wazuh-Indexer. For our certificate creation, I will just be taking advantage of the Wazuh certs tool script that they have deployed and provided out to everybody. So I will take advantage of that. You do also, of course, have the ability to create your certs if you have a internal PKI. So that is also perfectly fine as well. But in this case, I will be using the tool that Wazuh gives us. So first going to copy this command to actually download the script that we will run. And then I will also download our config.yaml file. And now with those on the box, let me go ahead and actually open up my config.yaml. And we'll need to make a few settings here. So within this script, or within this YAML file here, we're going to specify the nodes that we want to create certs for. So one of these will be our Wazuh-Indexer, of course, right? We need to create a certificate for our Wazuh-Indexer node. The Wazuh server, we actually won't need because we're not going to be taking advantage of FileBeat. We're going to use Graylog. So I am actually going to change this to Graylog server nodes because Graylog is actually what's going to be writing the data to our Wazuh-Indexer and not FileBeat, which if you guys are a little familiar with Wazuh, is probably what you guys are currently using to write to your Wazuh-Indexer. And we then have our Wazuh-Dashboard node that will create a cert for. So we first need to name each of our nodes. And I like to follow the naming convention of whatever the host name is of my server, right? So in my case here, now if I do a host name, okay, I see that. And then actually, because I'm not using an internal DNS as well within this lab environment, I'm going to cheat and just update the localhost file on this box to be able to resolve ingest.sockfortress.local to the correct IP address, internal IP address, which in this case is 10.10.10.2. So I'm going to go ahead and copy my host name and open up my etc host file. And I'm going to paste my host name there and then copy my internal IP address, paste that guy there, give me a space. And now if I ping via the host name, I should resolve to my internal address. And that looks good. So, okay, cool. So got that down. Now let's go ahead and configure our config.yaml file. So I'm going to use the host name of my server, and then my IP address will be the 10.10.10.2. And then if you have, like, let's say, for example, you had a 3-node cluster, right? You would just comment these or uncomment these out and then apply those here. So in my case, I would have, let's say I called it like ingest 2, and then my IP address was a 10.10.10.3. Like I would do that as accordingly. My Graylog server, so similar thing, but I will be deploying Graylog on this same server in the future. Again, because I don't want to purchase within the cloud environment that I'm using a unique server per service. In a production environment, I 100% recommend that because these services are pretty resource intensive, right? The Wazuh-Indexer and Graylog are having to crunch through a ton of stuff. So they need to have a lot of resources allocated to it so that they're able to adequately keep up with the amount of logs that we are receiving. So within a production environment, I do not recommend deploying these services on the same server. I would recommend spinning up dedicated server for these guys. But in my case, I'm just spinning them up all on the same server. So I'll do that there. And then our Wazuh-Dashboards will also be on the same server as well. And now we will go ahead and run our bash script to create these certificates. So we'll copy and go ahead and paste that there. And now we see our certs have been created. So if I list this out, we see our Wazuh certificates directory was created. So if I go into there, now we see the certs for each of our tools. So we have our ingest one that we're going to use, our root CA, and our admin cert that we will use when we initialize the cluster. If you did your multiple nodes, right? So if you did a node 2 and node 3, you would see certs for those hosts here within this directory as well. So you would have like an ingest 2 or an ingest 3 or whatever. So now with our certs created, we are now ready to actually install our Wazuh-Indexer. So we're first going to install prereqs if you don't already have them on your box. Actually, let me go ahead and run an app get update. And then let me run that again because I might just not have had the repos updated to grab these packages. Yeah, and that looks like the case. Okay, cool. All right, so prereqs are now done. I will now run this curl to install the GPG key so that our box will trust the Wazuh repository that we're about to download from. And let's go ahead and add the repository. And if you are using, let's say RPM, so if you're using CentOS or Amazon Linux or Red Hat, I'll link in the description below to Wazuh's documentation where you can take those same steps as well. But outside of actually installing the package, everything else will be the same, right? So if you're going a CentOS route instead of apt-get install, you'd have a yum install. That will be the only difference that you'll see here within this video that you will need to accommodate for if you're using a different distro. So now let's go ahead and actually install our Wazuh-Indexer, and it's saying you can't find it. Let's do an apt-get update to add that repo. And now if we run our install, now we can install it there. That has now been installed. So I will first go ahead and navigate into the directory. So it'll be under cd etc Wazuh-Indexer. So if I navigate here, here you will see our configuration files that we'll use. And again, how I said it's a fork of OpenSearch, right? So you familiarly will see our OpenSearch.yaml, JVM options that will also be able to set as well. But let's go ahead and first open up our OpenSearch.yaml. The configuration tweaks that we will first need to make is we need to tell it, okay, what interface do we want the Wazuh-Indexer service to listen on? Well, in this case, I want it to be on the internal interface that I have configured to this box, which is our 10.10.10.2. The node name, this of course could be whatever you want. I always think it's a good practice to follow whatever the host name is of the server just to avoid any confusion. So I'm going to stick that there. And then here is where we are setting, okay, who's going to be our initial master node at the first runtime of the Wazuh-Indexer service. And that's of course going to be our single node server because that's all we have. But if you had other nodes like a node 2 or a node 3, you could also uncomment these guys here and add those there as well. So they would also be eligible initial master nodes when you first start the cluster. The cluster name, you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and just change to Sock Fortress-demo. Discovery seed host. So this will be, okay, who are the other servers that the Wazuh-Indexer should look for to join the cluster? So I, of course, want the server that I'm working on here, which is our ingest node. But if I had a node 2 and a node 3, I would also add those here as well. This max local storage nodes, I'm going to change from 3 to 1 because I am a single node cluster. And now we will come back to this, but I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of that. I'm first actually going to go back and I'm actually going to run this command to create a tar of these so it makes the next commands a little more easier for us. So we should have our wazuh-certificates.tar file here. And now, so we've created our Wazuh-Indexer search directory, and I am now going to set a environment variable for our node name. And the node name will reflect the node name that we gave it within the config.yaml, right? So that'll be this guy here. So I'm going to just go ahead and type out node_name, and I'm going to set it equal to this. So this will now be set as a environment variable. So now when we run this tar command, here, our variable $node_name will be set to ingest.sockfortress.local. Go ahead and copy, paste that there. Now if I navigate into Etsy Wazuh-Indexer certs, we should see our certs and keys here. All right, so we got our admin, our ingest, and then our root CA as well. I am going to, because by default, so if we open up our open search, and I'm actually going to skip over renaming these certs into indexer.pem and indexer-key.pem, just because I personally think it's easier to kind of manage and track, especially as you're adding more nodes to your cluster. It's easier to kind of keep track of your certs if they're named uniquely. So I'm actually not going to rename them there. However, what we will have to do is I will have to make sure I rename them accordingly. So I will need to open up my opensearch.yaml and rename these guys from indexer.pem, because that's not actually what it's called, to our ingest.sockfortress.local.pem. And then I'll do the same for the, is it dash key? Yep, it is. Okay, cool. And then I'll also have to do that down here as well. So there will be two spots we have to do that. And so that looks good. So go ahead and save that off. Then we will need to change some permissions and ownership of the not only directory, but of the certificates themselves. So I'll go ahead and run this command here. We'll then set the ownership to the Wazuh-Indexer user and group. All right, so that all looks good. So our certs are done. We changed the opensearch.yaml to reflect that. And let's go ahead and configure our memory locking, which kind of gets more into the play of, we could start the Wazuh-Indexer right now and it would work. But I always recommend just a few kind of performance tuning tweaks that we can make prior to actually starting the service. And one of them is going to be the memory locking. So a good practice for this is taking half the amount of memory that you have and allocating that to Elastic. So in my case, I have, roughly 8 gigs of memory allocated to this server. So I'm going to allocate half of that. So I'm going to take 4 gigs and allocate that strictly to the Wazuh-Indexer service. So I'm telling the host here, hey, I want you to lock this memory only for the Wazuh-Indexer service. And that'll give us better performance as we start to ingest more and more logs. So what I'm first going to do is within the opensearch.yaml, we will set a setting for the Bootstrap memory lock, which may not be here by default. I don't think it is. Yeah, it doesn't look like it is. So I'll just find an empty line here and copy and paste that there. Go ahead and save that out. We will then need to edit our service file and set the limit minlock setting to infinity. Otherwise, the service will actually not be able to be started. So I'll go ahead and open this file up, and I will copy our limit minlock equal to infinity, and I'll come to our service block and just create a new line and store that there. I have a few more kind of recommendations that I've typed up there as well. Now let's actually open up our JVM options, our jvm.options. And by default, this file is set to 1 gig. However, I want to allocate 4 gigs of memory to my Wazuh-Indexer service. So I'm going to set that there. So I'm going to go ahead and save that out. And then let's go ahead and see if we can get our Wazuh-Indexer service up and running. So go ahead and enable it to tell it to start whenever the server is rebooted. And let's go ahead and hit it with a start. And all right, it looks like it has started. If we do a systemctl status, if I could type that right. All right, we see it is active. It will be actually writing to a log file as well. So if we go into var log Wazuh-Indexer, list this out, we could cat out our Sock Fortress demo of course, need to actually initialize the cluster, which is where our admin cert comes into play. So go ahead and clear the rest of that out. We have this indexer security init script that comes with the install of the Wazuh-Indexer service. So this script should already exist if we try to open it up. Sure enough, it does. So what I'll go ahead and do is just copy and paste that guy. And then we may have to point it to where the admin cert exists. Maybe it's smart enough that we don't have to. And actually, it looks like it is smart enough to where we don't have to. Nice. Okay, so that has now been done with success. So that looks good. Now, if we cat out our sock fortress, now if we cat out our log file, we see node has been initialized. So great, that looks good. All right, with that installed, and if we do like a netstat, we should see we're listening on ports 9200 and 9300. So all that is looking good. Now with that installed, let's actually deploy what Wazuh has forked a version of Kibana that they are calling the wazuh-dashboards. So again, let me clear this out. Let me actually get out of this directory and let's just make sure I have some of these prereqs if we need. So I'll go ahead and run that. We got the GPG key. The repository is still the Wazuh one, so we don't need to re-add that because we already have that. And so now once this finishes, all I have to run is our install of the Wazuh-Dashboards, cd into that directory, and that'll be under etc wazuh-dashboard. You could, of course, deploy this on a dedicated server as well. You don't have to deploy it on the same server that you are running one of your Wazuh-Indexer nodes on. So whatever your preference is. Let's go ahead and open up our OpenSearch dashboards.yaml. I'm going to go ahead and change the host that we'll be listening on to our internal interface. Our OpenSearch host, I'll go ahead and place in here as our, and we'll verify with our certificate. So that's fine. And we need to now deploy the certificates. So I will need to similarly create a directory under our Wazuh-Dashboards directory that we're going to call certs. And then actually I should still have this, right? So I should only just have to run that command there. And now if I cd into that, okay, good. We got our certs. Now let's go ahead and change our permissions of these files. And now let me open back up my OpenSearch dashboards.yaml file, and I will change the name of our key to point to the one that we just created or that we just moved over. All right, so that looks good. And actually what I'm going to do is tie this to the public interface that's assigned to the box so I can connect to it So I can connect to it over the internet. So I'm gonna paste that there. Let me go ahead and hit it with a restart. Now we should be good to go. So if I look at my listening ports, okay, I see we're listening on 443. So now I should be able to connect to my web UI here. Yep, and that looks good. Okay, cool. And we are getting prompted to log in. So because currently our credentials now are just admin and admin, and let's go ahead and change that. So there's also a password tool script that we can run as well. So we can copy, and this will go ahead and update our passwords for us. And make sure you do copy these down. We also need to change the Kibana server password within. Okay, so we just replace that within the key store. So if I hit our Wazuh dashboard with a restart, we should still all be good. And okay, that all looks good. If I go ahead and now log out as my admin and use my new password. So admin, and now I'm inputting my new password, then good. And while we're going to be using Grafana as our main visualization tool, I do recommend still deploying the Wazuh-Dashboards service because it will allow us to interact with Wazuh's API, which just makes it a little more user-friendly. We can update the rule files from our web UI. We can update the osec.conf from our web UI. So it makes Wazuh a little more easily accessible. So I would still recommend standing up the Wazuh dashboard service, and we can also interact with the Wazuh-Indexer API from here as well. For example, so let's say I want to run a request to like get, I think it's cluster health. Yeah. So if I go ahead and run this command, this API request, you see we get our response back on the total, on the current health of the cluster, and we're in a green status. We see our number of nodes that we have available within the cluster. So everything looks good. We can also manage indexes, and it just makes interacting with the Wazuh-Indexer service a little more user-friendly as well. And we'll also be able to create users that will be able to access particular indexes hosted within the stored within the stack in future videos. So I think that wraps it up for today's video, and I appreciate you guys' time, and I will see you in the next one.